my first question to you, Dr. Tharoor, is I read the dedication, and it's to your father, Chandran Tharoor. And there's a very beautiful term you've used, author's author.
Yes, it was his term actually, because sadly he died a long time ago at a relatively young age by today's standards. He was just 63. And when he passed away, I had published 2, maybe 3 books by then. But the very first one, my first one was my PhD thesis, Rehashed Reasons of State. But the second one, the first one for which there was a launch event, was The Great Indian Novel. And there at the reception, he very proudly introduced himself to people as the author's author, because he's the one who had after all authored me. But he really was the most profound influence on my life, including on words, and not just on words, because so much else as I've written in that opening chapter I owe to him. His zest for life, his energy, the way in which he interacted with people, which is something he instilled in me, because as a kid I used to be the opposite of many of today's children. I used to just love curling up in a corner with a book and ignoring everybody, and he forced me out into some sort of extroversion. But also, frankly, his love of words was fabulous. He had grown up in a Kerala village, been to a Malayalam medium school, learned English as a second language. When you learn English as a second language in a Kerala government school, believe me, you don't know English. So his elder brother took him off to England at the age of 19 actually, almost 19, 18 and a half, to London at the end of the Second World War. And of course, he had to essentially relearn English from scratch. And in so doing, he fell in love with the language. I discovered old notebooks of his where he had written down passages of Byron and Shakespeare and Dickens. And he fell in love with words by training himself. He never had a formal education in language or literature. And I always regret he never actually found enough time to become a writer. He joined in the newspaper business, but on the managerial side. He was the London manager of the Indian newspaper, The Statesman, then the Bombay manager, then the advertisement manager in Calcutta. And stayed in newspapers all his life, but always on the management side. In fact, at one point, when I was in my teens, I remember there was an annual cricket match between the Statesman managerial team and the editorial team. And I was roped in to play for my dad's team, which was the managerial team, and I did rather well. Ball took 3 or 4 wickets. And the next day's paper, the editorial team complained that as a writer, I should have been playing for them, not for the managers. But anyway, to cut a long story short, Dad loved words, and sadly the only evidence I have to point to are the wonderful letters he wrote. Some of which have copies of survived. Everything from very routine things to encourage a subordinate, to a letter of condolence in somebody passing away, to a letter encouraging someone who's going through a rough time, to a letter, even something relatively routine like wishing somebody well on a wedding or a birthday, whatever. He just had a wonderful way with words. And
you called him a milver. Milver.
He was a milver, yes,
yeah.
But that was not his word. It's a word that somebody came up with and never really caught on, but it exists in the dictionary. Milver is someone who shares with you a love of words. So if today I could say Manjari is my milver, and Bipin won't mind because there's nothing wrong about it. It's merely that she loves words too. So what I'm saying is that my father was, in a sense, he made me his milver, because he really was absolutely besotted with words, and he conveyed that to us as children. For example, when we were very small, all in single-digit ages, my sister younger than me, he would give us a long word and make us do an exercise of creating short words out of them. I was older, so my short words had to be minimum 4 letters. My sisters were allowed to have 3-letter words or more, and we had to compete with each other to guess as many words as possible from the words and letters in his word. And of course, he would always mark us and then tell us what other words we could have had that we missed out, and so on. He was an absolute fanatic of the game Scrabble. I don't know how many of you still play Scrabble. He picked it up in England. I'm sorry, only one hand went up. 2, 3, 4. Oh my God, lots of Scrabble. Great, okay. 50 Scrabble players here. Well, my father was one of the very first, because he picked it up in England before it had been popular in India. Came back to Bombay and had to find enough England returned people to create a team to play Scrabble every weekend, that kind of thing. And sure enough, he taught us all when we were kids to play with him. And eventually, my sisters did a better job than me of passing on a love of Scrabble to their children. And that too was something which Dad would have been very proud of. One of his grandsons, my sister Shobha, who was here last year, her son, is probably better than he was, better than his grandfather was at the game. And even my 89-year-old mother still plays it with my sister and me these days whenever I have the time, or my sister when I don't have the time. So that's something else. And then other word games came up. When Boggle was invented, he took to it with a vengeance. There were lots of other things like that coming up. And then he invented a game which is very much like the Wordle that you all know today. That is that in car journeys, he would imagine a 5-letter word and ask us to guess it. Now, unlike Wordle, there were no green and yellow and grey squares to tell you which ones were right. He just told us how many letters we got right. So we had to do the laborious work, but he gave us 20 turns, not 6. So, we would have to say stick, stack, stock to figure out whether the O was there, or the I was there, or the A was there. And you guess the vowels first and then try and create words. A lot of fun. And then he saw that we were doing that and guessing within 20. So he created a word like, he would imagine a word like myths, which has no vowel. And of course, we used up most of our turns imagining words with vowels. But it was a lot of fun. And that's the whole thing about Dad, is he communicated to us this infectious sense of fun about words. So I miss him terribly. And to my mind, the book in many ways is a tribute to him, hence the dedication.
Wonderful. Such a lovely, heartwarming relationship that you have with your father still. So coming to your chapter on borrowed plumes, you've talked about the influence of Australian languages and French and Irish and all those. And I particularly like the French, and there is the whole lot of Alliance Française group here, I think. You'd be happy to hear that according to Dr. Tharoor, 1/3 to 2/3 of all the words from English language are actually of French origin. so
That you're asking.
yes, that's exactly what. Why is that?
Well, why was that was because, the Anglo-Saxons spoke Anglo-Saxon until in 1066, the Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, as we all know from our history books, landed up and defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. And from 1066 onwards, the French ruled England. It was the Norman aristocracy, so the English history books call them the Normans, but they were basically French. They spoke Old French or medieval French, whatever you want to call it. Now, what happened was, for about 300 years, French was the ruling court language of England, the way in which the Mughals used to speak Persian in court and so on. The Normans spoke French in court. But then, within about 300 years, inevitably interaction with the local population and so on, English became the first king to actually speak English himself and to function in English in the court and so on, was a king who was born exactly 300 years after the Battle of Hastings. Well, 301 years, 1367. And from then onwards, English, but of course the English took in a lot of French words. And that was inevitable because this was the language that they had been speaking, and it had completely infused itself into English. So you often had grammatical structures which came from Anglo-Saxon roots, but the vocabulary was heavily French. And so you'll be surprised, it's not surprising actually, that some of the things associated with ruling all came from French. So all the titles of the nobility, baron, count, viscount, earl, all of that's from French. Liege, honor, all of that's from French. Even the ABCs of government, administration, bureaucracy, and constitution are all from French. And then in this chapter, art, absolutely. There's a lot. The French would like to tell you that the English were uncivilized until they came and civilized them. So actually, I can give you at least one of my various lists of French words, because it really is quite remarkable how many there are. So if language is the vehicle of culture, I've written, it's not surprising to see how many terms from cuisine, art, and architecture are owed to French. Almost everything on a menu seems to be in French, so that's not a theme that should detain us here. But art is more francophone than many realize. The very word art, plus music, dance, theater, to specific terms like paint, canvas, gallery, portrait, brush, palette, montage, surrealism, impressionism, fauvism, cubism, symbolism, art nouveau, gouache, collage, and frieze. You cannot describe art without using French terms. When a musician performs in harmony or plays a melody with rhythm, she is using French terms. In the theater, the words director, author, and stage all come from French as well. So there's really a lot. Of course, there's a longer chapter than that. I just read you one paragraph. But to give you a flavor of how much French has influenced the English language. And then, as I point out, Manjari, it's not only French. I have chapters in German words in English. Surprisingly enough, Japanese words in English. Lots of them. And of course, Indian words won't surprise you either. So I wrote in one of my anti-colonial books that the British took the word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits. But they took the word from here. Thug as well. It's called thug for us.
Since you mentioned the Indian chapter is very funny because there are so many words we do use and we don't realize we're using them. Like you've reduced, which is losing weight. So maybe you could tell us more on that.
No, I mean, the whole chapter on Indian English is actually both a defense and an attack. It is a defense of Indian English because I think we are sometimes those who speak the proper King's English or Queen's English till last year. But anyway, we tend to be a little too obsessed with the BBC version of the language. Actually, English is a language that not only borrows from other languages, it also has variants within itself in various countries. Australian English and American English are not the same as English. And so one of the things that, for example, people sometimes parody us for in English, in our English, is actually exactly what the Americans did. That is, some words that fell out of use in England and therefore seemed archaic to the English here remain in America. So, for example, the Americans say fall, whereas the British say autumn. But in fact, fall was the word in England about the time the first Americans came over with the English language in the 1600s. Similarly, the Americans say gotten. The English say have got. But gotten was actually legitimate English till about 1600s. So when Indians say thrice instead of 3 times, or say furlong to indicate a short distance, or say fortnight instead of 2 weeks, none of which are anymore used in England, we are being perhaps using, we are being old-fashioned, but it's not archaic or quaint or wrong. It simply is the fact that we have kept on using those words and they lost them. Big deal. I don't think that's bad English, it's just Indian English. Then there's a whole category of Indian English which was invented by our media. Things like air dash. The politicians always air dashing to Delhi. That's an Indian English word, doesn't exist anywhere else. Or, oh, that fellow, the police have named a history sheeter. What's a history sheeter? A criminal with such a long record that is a history, a sheet, That's what history sheeter is, but again, doesn't exist outside India. And so on. I've often mentioned that matrimonial advertisements are particularly good at Indian English. These are usages which are not wrong, but they're very original meanings in India. So a prospective bride is often described as wheatish complexioned, right? Or traditional with modern outlook. And worst of all, or best of all, is homely. Now, homely in English, American English, means somebody who's rather plain, not good looking at all. It's called homely. Whereas in Indian English, homely means that she's a good homemaker, she'll be happy to stay at home, she's not one of these too modern girls. That's what the matrimonial ads have told us. So that's also not bad English, it's distinctively Indian English. Then there's the English that comes from Indian attitudes to relationships and so on. So when somebody says, you talk about your brother, and somebody says, is he your real brother? He's not accusing you of having imaginary siblings. You have a fantasy brother somewhere, you imagine one. No. He is basically asking you, is he your same parents or a cousin brother? Because for us in India, we actually say cousin brother and cousin sister, which nobody in England or America would do, or any other English-speaking country but India, because relationships matter more to us. And so you've got all of these different expressions. I even don't object to the wonderful Indianism, what is your good name? Why? Because, for example, in Bangla, there is an expression called the dark naam, which is the name you're called, and the bhalo naam, which is the good name, the name that you officially have in your. And very many Bengalis, pretty much every Bengali I know has a dark naam and a bhalo naam. So it's not at all surprising we have this. And what's wrong with it? Similarly, Westerners are surprised when we say auntie or uncle all the time. Because no one does that in the West, right? If you're going to be very polite and deferential, you'd say sir or madam. Otherwise, just call them by their first name. I was shocked when at the age of 22, I joined the UN and my Danish boss said, call me by my first name. And I, in India, we never do that, but the others do. But here we call people auntie and uncle. And yes, it's Indian, but it's not wrong English. And one last example is the one that Manjari led the question with, which is the euphemistic use of language, because we are a more polite country than many English-speaking countries. So we don't like to say the direct thing. So you wouldn't say, if somebody says, oh, you've been married for 2 years, any issues? It doesn't mean, are you having problems in your marriage? It just means, have you had any children? That's the way we do it. Or that we very frequently use sort of very delicate terms for certain kinds of conditions. And as Manjari said, one thing is, you never say, are you pregnant? You say, are you expecting? You never say, when somebody looks very thin, you don't say, have you lost weight? You say, have you reduced? So all of that, these are distinctively Indian, but there's nothing wrong with them. Where we get into wrong is usages which are simply bad English. And there are too many Indian usages which I disapprove of, and I've said so in the book. You can't say, I will return back. Because if you're returning, you're coming back. I mean, that is just redundancy, right? Another thing that really irritates me is this Indian habit of using side wrongly. Hello, this is Ranjit, this side. What side? I'm not on any other side. For God's sake, I'm answering my phone. Or entry from backside only. You've seen those signs, right? There's even a book with that title. And I just don't think that, but now there are Indian usages which Westerners disapprove of that I don't. For example, I feel if the meaning is clear, there's no basis for that kind of objection. So for example, there is a usage that says, in India, it says, I'll revert to you. Now in English or American or Australian or any other English, I will revert to you means I will become what you used to be. Whereas in India, it simply means I will reply to you, I'll get back to you. But that use of revert is uniquely Indian. But so what? Every Indian knows what they're saying. So why not? If somebody asks you, what's your native place? Everyone knows what they're doing, right? I mean, so I don't see a problem with that. But I do see a problem when somebody says, I will miss you till you are gone. What is this? You'll miss you till I'll miss you till you come back, yeah, not till you're gone. Because this confusion between till and as long as is specifically in Indian usage, and it's a wrong usage. So this is where I draw the line, and you might enjoy the chapter because I've got several examples like this of how we use language in ways that are distinctively Indian but not bad, and how we use language in ways that are wrong. There's a young man already complaining. Why do people speak like this?
It's a chapter I enjoyed a lot, but it brings us to a question about purity of language. The infiltrations and the evolving of language, how pure language actually is.
It's not.
It's not.
I mean, there are languages that seek to impose a kind of artificial purity, and my French friends know what I'm talking about because they have the Académie Française, which actually polices the language. Every time French people start using a new word, the Académie Française will rule on it. So a few years ago, I remember they were saying le weekend, and the Académie Française says, no, le weekend is not French. You have to say la fin de semaine, right? So that's the kind of thing that the French Academy does, but even they cannot really effectively control the kind of language people speak amongst themselves. But every other language tends to be a living language, a growing language. New terms come in all the time. Even people of my generation have had to learn words like fishing and meme and emoji and LOL and even FOMO and so on, because these are all words that have come in the course of other people's usage, or with new inventions coming like the internet or digital, which has a totally different meaning. The old day digital simply meant anything to do with your finger. But now digital means something very different. It's about the digital era we're living in. And so it goes.
And also in the book you said that other languages express emotions better than in English. and certain words, like for example the Russian Toska, I think, which is
Yeah.
Adda Lake of the Soul, and this cannot be translated into English.
Well, English, I mean, as I joked, the English are the land of the stiff upper lip.
Okay.
So even if they feel emotions, they don't allow themselves to express them very much. So for a lot of things to do with emotional feelings, there are words in other languages, and I've got a whole chapter on them. Not all of which I remember by heart, but Toska is one of them, because Vladimir Nabokov, who was of Russian birth and origin but wrote all his fiction in English, Nabokov talked about Toska being an untranslatable Russian idea, Toska, which essentially is this deep, indescribable, but completely irrational anguish. It's not based on something. If somebody dies and you feel sad, that's not Toska. Toska is you feel this deep, deep sadness without being able to explain why. And at the same time, Portuguese has a similar word, which is called saudade, S-A-U-D-A-D-E. And that also captures the same idea. These are both cultures where they can experience this kind of feeling. English has no word for it.
So there's something I want to actually challenge you for. Would you like me to challenge Dr. Tharoor? I think it's time. I think it's time someone challenged you. And let's do it at PILF.
All right. You got me a little worried, but all right, let's see.
No, so I want to give you an expression in English, and which has no single word. There is no single word for it. If I give you an expression, would you be able to create a word on the spot, on the stage, right now?
I'll tell you, okay, but I can give you, I've actually often wondered, you know, in my mother tongue, Malayalam, there is a word for something for which there is no English expression, which is what number position is that or that person or that object. For example, suppose you're going to a rental car company and you want to rent a car, and there are the whole fleet of cars, and you want to know which car is the one you're getting. You would have to ask, Acha, what number position in that row of cars is my car? Right? You can't, there's no one word to say which, you know, like which car, I mean, right? So there's nothing indicating a position or the 10th person in a queue. You would have to ask which number is that person standing in the queue. Well, in Malayalam, there is a word called etramate. Etramate means which number, literally, is that person or that object or that item that is standing. So I thought, you know, why can't English come up with a word like with? We have which, when, why, what, but we don't have with. So there's one for you. But anyway, you can ask the ones you have.
No, but okay, that's one word. Yes, we are going to create history today. So we need the screen down.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to give you an expression, and you have to create a word.
Fair enough. You go ahead.
And you'll have to go slow, and if you can do it.
Okay.
Okay. If
I'll
you can
spell
do
it
it,
for you.
you have to spell it, and we will type it there. And I want all the media to pay attention because because we want to create history right now with new words by Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Okay. The first expression is. Can you give me a single word for the feeling of being one with the universe, or as if you're the universe or the universe is inside you?
Ooh, that's quite a concept.
Yes.
Anyone here feels that way?
I do.
Okay. Well, look, remember, English used to borrow heavily from various languages. Many of the words of English come from Greek, Latin, and of course we talked about French, German, other languages. And they often mix them up. So like television, tele is Greek and vision is Latin and so on. So you can actually think of mixing something up. So one with the universe, the feeling. So the feeling is easier to come up with an abstract noun for that. Why don't we try something like omni, which is of course all, everything, all encompassing. Vista, which is the universe, and then tude, like solitude, fortitude, beatitude. So omnivistitude. Okay. How about that?
Wonderful. Can we have the word here? Can you see it? It's omni.
O-M-N-I-V-I-S-T-A.
Omnivistitude.
T-U-D-E.
Wonderful. I hope everyone's taking note of this. Please start using this word.
Oh, no.
Let's put it in the
Only
Oxford
the feeling
dictionary.
one with the universe.
Omnivistitude. Wonderful, Dr. Tharoor. But there's one more. I have another one.
Why one more? Try. This is fun.
Oh, okay. I like that. Okay. A single word for knowing when you meet a person that he or she has been in your life for lifetimes. It's the feeling of knowing.
Sounds like a pickup line, you know. Justified lust or something. But no, I'll give you a more serious one. I've often wondered why English borrowed from Latin and Greek and never from Sanskrit, which is actually as old as older than them.
Wow.
So why don't we take the idea of soul from Sanskrit
Okay.
and in tribute to our friends from the Alliance Française, take the word friendship or friend from French. So I would say Atmami.
Wow.
Atma and Ami together.
Wow.
Ami is French for friend.
Wonderful. Atmami. Can you write that, please?
Oh, he's sitting at the laptop and typing these up.
yes, of
Okay, I can't
course.
see that from. All right.
We are creating history, Dr. Tharoor.
All right. Well, vocabulary anyway.
So that's the second one. Are you game for another one?
One last one. sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, a single word for unconditional love that transcends even life.
That's actually easier because something that transcends everything, even life, would be eternal. And eternal, that comes from Latin classic, eterna, A-E-T-E-R-N-A. And again, for love, which other language can you borrow love from but the French? So,
Again.
etern-amour.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
It is eternamu.
Yeah,
Eterna
A-E-T-E-R-N-A-M-O-U-R.
Yeah, can you type that?
Yeah? Oh, it's up there.
Oh, lovely. Oh, yeah, it's there. Oh, wonderful. That's amazing. 3 new words from Dr. Tharoor for the Oxford Dictionary.
Not to mention wet, that's 4.
Oh, yes, okay, that too. And I request all of you to start please using these words. I'm going to use them in my novels, and the media to please take note of it. Okay, and let's make
What have I wrought?
well, something nice and interesting for sure.
Naughty Manjari.
Okay, so we open up,
I thought we have the time to do what you were asking me backstage, whether I'd like to read a
Yes, of
couple of
course.
passages from one of my...
Yes, of course.
Because,
Let's do
one
that.
of the things Manjari was asking me was about all the new words in the English language that are
please,
coming
yeah.
in. And I said, I have a chapter on that, which is towards the very end of the book. I think that's the
Okay.
epilogue of the book, actually. It's an epilogue called The Linguistic Legacy. And I'll just read a couple of paragraphs so you get the sense of the fun involved, okay? When I was persuaded a couple of years ago to test my knowledge of millennial English on a television show, I guessed my way past some of the answers and stumbled at the rest. One could guess the connotations of fleek, slay, and even adulting from the way they sounded. But how was one to know that quiche meant hotter than hot? The generation gap is a cliche, but the use of language is the clearest evidence of its existence. That today's young have evolved a vocabulary that means nothing to their parents shouldn't surprise anyone, since the same charge has been leveled at every previous generation. But while most of us can understand why it's cool to be seen with a hot date, being told someone is a snack requires a cultural leap. After all, since when was a cheese toast or a sabudana vada a symbol of attractiveness? Millennials refers to the generation born between 1980 and 1994, and as a parent of 2 of that vintage and uncle to 4 others, I'm relieved that they've largely not chosen to address me in such language. They've already been succeeded by 2 more cohorts, Generation Z or Z, 1995 to 2012, also known as iGen or Zoomers, a reference to the video chat app that so many of them use for school and work during the COVID-19 pandemic, and a generation born after 2010. I call them kids. The scholar Jean Twenge dubs them polars, since they live in polarized times, but the broadly accepted term is Generation Alpha. So the better known millennial and Gen Z expressions are not new words, but familiar English ones now assigned different meanings by the young. Terms like woke, which has nothing to do with your alarm clock, but means socially aware. Lit, connoting something that's amazing or fun. And thirsty, meaning desperate for attention. Others have become part of the routine currency of everyday life in the 21st century. I mentioned some of them already: meme, phishing, viral, selfie. Some others don't depart very far from their original meanings. Low key on a millennial's tongue means not quiet, but subtle. Fit refers to a person's overall clothing ensemble. It's short for outfit. And shook means shaken. And in the era of Netflix and other OTT platforms, everyone knows that to binge watch is to watch multiple episodes of a show, or indeed an entire series in one setting. Though I have still no idea why dope means excellent, and Sikh expresses admiration or high approval for something impressive or exciting.
Much time. So we can take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's a young
So
man
we'll
there
just
with glasses, yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Manjari. So my question is how important it is to have the inflow of words from other languages so that it keeps growing for our Indian languages as well.
That's a very good question. By the way, great jacket, huh?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I know that some languages have been quite unabashed about doing that. We do it very, very rarely, and especially in the days of what was disparagingly referred to as Doordarshan Hindi. They were determined to create very authentically Sanskrit-derived equivalents for every term. But they had to finally give up when passport came around, so passport is passport in Hindi also. I think the Malaysians went for immigration, but we have a Hindi word for that. I don't know, I think we could be a little more open. I mean, we don't have to be like French. Even though I love French. One of my favorite language as well after of all those that I know anyway. But having said that, the short answer to your question is yes. I think languages should be living, breathing, growing things. And just as they themselves will come up with words used by speakers of those languages, similarly, we shouldn't be embarrassed to borrow a word from a language for which we don't have an equivalent. Actually, the Portuguese saudade almost sounds like it could be Indian, but it's not. We can use that. We don't have a word for indescribable, irrational anguish and sadness, do we? No. Dukh, gham, no. So why not? Okay, there you are.
Yeah.
Hi.
Good morning, sir. Actually, my name is Rahul, and currently I'm running an electric toothbrush company. My question over to you is, what advice would you like to give to youth like us so that we achieve success and also create an impact in the society?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is to know yourself. I think it's the most valuable lesson. All of us, as we're growing up, there's no more important task than to know who we are, what we value, what we are good at, what we're not so good at. And the youth is the time to find out by actually trying to do things that appeal to us and discovering we're not good enough at them, or doing them and discovering we had unexpected talent we never actually exercised. Now, not everybody has the same talent. Not everyone can win the 100-meter dash. Not everyone can come first in maths class. Not everyone can make a great speech or sing a beautiful song or whatever. But everyone has some quality. There is no human being on the planet who doesn't have qualities that they can develop and strengthen. It may simply be the ability to make your friends laugh. It could simply be the kindness of your heart that makes you the person people want to turn to when they're in distress, to lean themselves on your shoulder. Whatever it may be. Know yourself, find out who you are, and then be the best you that you can possibly be. Nobody else can be you, right? You're you. Be the best of that. I think the one thing no human being can be forgiven for doing is letting themselves down by just not trying. If you know you have a talent, it's your duty to exercise it and to develop it and to be the best you can be at it. And I think honestly, career, society will take care of itself once you're that. If we had a nation full of excellence, of people very good at what they're doing, somebody might be the best baggage porter at the railway station, somebody might be the best pani puri maker on the street, somebody might be the smartest CEO, it doesn't matter what they're doing. If they will just be the best at what they can be, why wouldn't we flourish and prosper as a country? I think we would. And that applies to all you young people because you're still a work in progress. You can yet develop yourself along.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Very sound advice. Yeah. Vipin.
Can I take this opportunity? Hello, Dr. Tharoor. It was a wonderful session, and I have a comment to make and a question for you. The comment is Pune is supposed to be the hub of Marathi medium people, and everybody speaks Marathi. And in Pune, the Pune Marathi is considered to be the pure Marathi, the Shuddha Marathi, and they make mockery of all the other Marathi spoken in Maharashtra. They should take something from this session and from your book. This is my comment. And my question to you is, thank you.
I hope you
They
don't
might
mean...
draw the line at Bombay, but anyway.
True.
No,
Bombay
and
Marathi is totally different.
I
I've
also
lived
hope
in
you
Bombay.
don't mean me.
Everyone. I too was making that mistake long time ago, but I stopped it. My question to you is, a normal Indian now cannot speak one single sentence in their own mother tongue. They mix Hindi, they mix English, they mix something. You are also multilinguist. We know as a politician and as an author, you don't mince words. But do you mince languages? Or are you clear in one language and you speak only English in English? But when you speak in Hindi or Malayalam, are you only speaking that language?
Look, I'll be very honest and say that English is de facto my best language, in the sense that, at least with English, there's no excuse if I say something wrong, because I knew perfectly well what I was doing. With my Hindi, my Malayalam, even my French, there might be sometimes a word used which is not the most felicitous word, simply because my vocabulary in those languages may not be as extensive as my vocabulary
In English.
And that's something which I'm conscious of. And then, of course, between two Romance languages or two Indian languages, there can often be what's called false friends. The French have an expression for it, faux amis. So that, for example, in French, there are words directly that have come into the English language, like rendezvous, for example, is a French word. It means the same thing in English, and you just write rendezvous. You don't even put italics, and everyone knows what you mean. Rapprochement, or envoy is envoi, but it's the same thing in English and French. But there are words, for example, in French like risqué, which we use in English, but in English it means naughty. A risqué book or a risqué movie has got salacious bits in it, and that's very naughty. In French, risqué just means risky. So you can make a, I can give you other examples in Malayalam, and Malayalam is the most Sanskritized of Indian languages. So where the same Sanskrit root exists in Hindi, you often have the same word. So for example, you could say in Hindi, very formal Hindi, Vishram kijiye. In Malayalam, it's Vishramikyu, which is perfectly the same thing. But there are some words which are identical from Sanskrit but acquire different meanings. So in Hindi, prayas is koshish, to try. Prayasam in Malayalam, which is straight from Sanskrit, is difficulty. So you can go completely wrong. Or even a simple thing, I found myself in Hindi saying pratiksha, which in Malayalam means expectation, but in Hindi means waiting. I should have said apeksha.
Oh, yeah.
So this kind of problem is, so when you speak too many languages, I'm afraid, you do end up in a situation where one language could confuse the other, even if you make an effort not to let one word intrude into the, but the fact is, it's not always possible to be 100% accurate and fluent in multiple languages. There are some people who are like that. I certainly don't claim that credit.
Thank you very much.
Now, before that, I have a question.
Oh.
Since we're talking about mincing words, you have a chapter on diplo speak.
Yes, I do.
And you
That's
say,
what my UN days.
yes, and you say diplomats, of course, think twice before saying nothing. So, you want to add to that?
Well, I can give you a few other. I have a few lame jokes in it too. Like a diplomat is somebody who will tell you to go to hell and make you look forward to the trip. Where are we now? There's also, of course.
This is chapter 25.
Yeah, one. There's. A rude person might say that that lady has a face that would stop a clock. Or the diplomat would say that lady has a face that would make time stand still. Far better answer. Anyway, in fact, the consistent desire to avoid giving offense, which characterizes diplo speak, once prompted me to twist an old sexist joke into one about diplomacy. If he says yes, he means maybe. If he says maybe, he means no. If he says no, he's no diplomat. But anyway, and I've given more examples of that, but you don't really want to. You want me to go to? All right. Well, this really goes back to my years at the UN when I was constantly consorting with diplomats and mastering their particular language. So I would say, for example, you never say the two prime ministers disagreed bitterly over an issue. You say there was a candid exchange of views. You never say the minister intends to do absolutely nothing about a particular problem. You say the minister is deeply concerned. That's a polite way of saying he's not going to do anything. He's just concerned. Inevitably, diplomacy acquires its own vocabulary, which might baffle people with a literal familiarity with the English language. One term I discovered in the UN was non-paper. How can a piece of paper be a non-paper? This is particularly confusing because it always involved a sheet of paper or more. So what was the not doing there? The answer is the paper existed physically but not officially. A diplomat who submitted a non-paper was putting down his government's ideas for discussion and writing them on paper for clarity and ease of comprehension, but the proposal had no official standing until the other side agreed to it. That's a non-paper. But calling it a non-paper, the official submitting it preserved full deniability, the right to disown its contents until it became politically feasible to acknowledge them. So if I give you a non-paper and you reject the proposal, no face is lost on either side. I've not given you anything and you have not said no to anything. But if you agree and I agree, then we can actually publish the paper officially. Then it's no longer a non-paper, it's a paper. That's the kind of thing in diplomacy. There are other examples. I can tell you one example from two examples from my own experience. One is not very happy, because when I went to Saudi Arabia with Dr. Manmohan Singh, I told a TV interviewer that Saudi Arabia was a fine interlocutor. An interlocutor in UN and diplomatic language, it's not in the book, so I'm telling you a story that's not in the book, was simply somebody you're talking to. So right now, Manjari is my interlocutor, I'm her interlocutor. But some malicious people in the media twisted this around to allege I had been standing Indian diplomacy and foreign policy on its head by making Saudi Arabia an intermediary, which is not at all what I meant. So it completely cast a blight on Dr. Manmohan Singh's trip to Saudi Arabia, and I realized one shouldn't use diplo-speak with the Indian media. That's the other thing. But the other story, which I do tell in the book, was actually an actual example of a diplomatic conversation I had. When I was Under Secretary General of the UN, it was my job to chair press conferences of all heads of state. And I remember the first time that President Musharraf came and gave a press conference at the UN headquarters, the Pakistanis specifically asked that the Indians should not be chairing the press conference, and I stepped aside and said, why do I want to make an issue of it? And I asked one of my deputies, rector on my staff, who happened to be a Kenyan citizen of Kashmiri Muslim origin. I told him, you chair the press. And the Pakistanis seemed to be happy. At the end of all that, the following year, President Musharraf was coming back again. And this time the Pakistani ambassador again came to see the Secretary General's office. And they said specifically, we want Shashi Tharoor to chair the press conference. And the reason was that was the beginning of the Pakistani charm offensive with India. It was 2003, Dr. Manmohan Singh had just become, 2004 I beg your pardon, Dr. Manmohan Singh had just become Prime Minister, and they were going to unofficially and then later officially meet in New York. So that is why President Musharraf wanted to hold this press conference in front of the whole world media with an Indian by his side. And while he was there, somebody asked him a question about, why a peace initiative now and so on. He said, you know the old expression, when elephants fight, it is the grass that gets trampled. All the other countries are suffering because of us fighting. We need to make peace. So after we stepped off the podium, we went into the office just behind and I exchanged a few pleasantries. I said to the President, Mr. President, do realize that when elephants make love, also the grass gets trampled.
I just love this chapter. Okay, some questions from the audience. Okay,
Lots of
Naveen.
hands, lots and lots.
Let's take one from Naveen.
Hello, thank you very much for your wit and eloquence. I'm a tech CEO, and I'm very curious about the way you're tracing language through. So given the amount of Indian leaders of technology companies, I'm wondering whether you're seeing any Indian influence on the English language coming from the American software companies now.
No, I'm afraid because tech is such an American-dominated area that the Indians who go and excel in tech are picking up American vocabulary.
Yeah.
I haven't heard Google suddenly becoming, Gangayan or something instead, even though Sundar Pichai is heading them. But it's a good thought. Maybe we should encourage Satya Nadella and Sundar Pichai and their likes,
more
and many
Indian.
more of them,
Yeah.
to actually use some Indian words in their products. So far, even though NVIDIA almost sounds like Nvidia, but it's not, because it was founded by a Chinese gentleman, I don't really think of a single example where an Indian word has gone into tech vocabulary. Let's try and think of something.
There's a challenge.
A very quick one. we are talking today about words. Maybe 20 years down the line, we'll be talking about emojis, which we are using in our text. Emojis are, very fascinating, and to me, it's very challenging. How do you see that evolving in future?
To be honest, I didn't see the point. First of all, I didn't see the point of all these acronyms to begin with. LOL and SMH and FOMO and all of these things. I was wondering what was the point of them. Why can't you just say what you want to say? But I realized it's partially because of the whole texting culture that's come up, and that the shorter the better, the easier it is. And the emoji takes it to the next logical extreme.
Yeah.
You don't have to express surprise, wonderment, amusement, whatever. You just press one icon and off it goes. So that's why those things exist. And it certainly saves time in a texting culture. Whether it's of any particular value, I don't know. To begin with, at one point there was a real concern that emojis would themselves be supplanted by GIFs, the graphic interface format, GIF, which shows pictures or animated little things. It would last about a few seconds, but which also can communicate even more effectively because they have real people on them. The same thing. So instead of saying SMH, and there's no real emoji really for SMH, you could actually have a GIF or a GIF or whatever it is called of some clip from an actor in a movie shaking his head, and that became your message. I don't know. I still prefer words. No apologies. I would much rather people actually said what they mean using words.
This side now. We'll take a lady. Yeah.
Okay, it's not a question. Because we are in Pune, because you have been in politics, we know the north-south divide in language also. I am appealing to Manjari, my dear friend, and to Mr. Tharoor. Can we create a whole new language? Why few words? And we can all start. We can have our whole new language, which is a unifying Indian language, and the next generation will use that.
There was an attempt made to do exactly that, not for India, but for the whole world. It's called Esperanto. And I'm afraid no one speaks it, literally. I mean, it exists. There are Esperanto books and dictionaries, but I just don't. In fact, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose thought we could create a national language out of Hindustani in the Roman script. Then everybody would give up their scripts and learn one. This is what the Turks did when they eliminated the Arabic and Persian script and just went for the Roman script for Turkish. But I think our cultures are far too entrenched and for far too long to permit that. I honestly don't think this is going to be a worthwhile effort. But thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, and thank you, Dr. Manjari. Amazing conversation as always. So my question is, I take a cue from your Diplo speak, and in one of George Orwell's novel 1984, talks about newspeak. I think that's what was mentioned. So what's your take, on the control of language by the state?
It is worrying. I mean, the states actually would find it difficult to control language. Language is what people speak. What's more worrying is when the culture itself starts controlling language. So, this whole onset of political correctness. I have a few chapters about words you can't use at Stanford and things like that, or words that the Oxfam organization won't let their employees use. I think this thing is getting a bit too far. To actually not use words like husband and wife, you have to say spouse. Not use words like father or mother, you have to say parent. I mean, also just to avoid any connotation of sexism, this thing goes too far. Language is useful. I'm sorry, I'm old-fashioned enough to say I actually think that calling a woman actor an actor is a loss, because especially if her name is ambiguous, you can't be sure whether it's a male or a female. Or if the person is anonymous, you're talking about an actor who did something. Why can't it be an actress who did something? There was nothing offensive about it, but apparently now we've got to be. I even thought in my UN days, but I gave up that struggle, that chairman was a gender-neutral title. It referred to the position and not to the gender of its occupant. So we would say Madam Chairman or Mr. Chairman. But no, now we have to say chairperson. All right, that battle may have been lost. But many other things, I think the culture itself has elevated political correctness to a point where it actually, I think, dilutes the effectiveness of language in some places. Not always, and sometimes there's a great case to be made for not being racially offensive. If people are offended by a term, don't use it. But that's a clear proposition. It's not because of a word, it's because the people and how they react to the word. But otherwise, I think we've really gone a bit too far. So, but as far as newspeak and so on is concerned, Orwell was painting a very sinister portrait of a dystopian society where literally there was an all-seeing camera and screen in everyone's home, telling you what to do, what to say, and if you actually departed from their norms, they would monitor you and they would take action and so on. So that was really a frightening tyranny, that image. I don't think that even in a country like Russia or China that we're there. I think we're still a freer people in the world than Orwell feared.
Hello, sir. My name is Roopsa. I'm from Symbiosis College of Arts and Commerce.
Hi.
And have a question for you. That is, while we stand here and sit here and celebrate the formation of new words and languages, my concern is every language has its, beauty. It has a history of its own. So while we are forming new words, these authenticity of a language tends to get lost somewhere. So that's what I want to know. What do you think? Does the authenticity not get lost?
Even that's like the first question about purity. What is authentic, what is pure anymore in a world in which there's so much of intermingling, so much of connection, so much of, and especially in the era of the internet, we can be so easily in contact with other cultures, other languages. What is authenticity? I must say, I am in the battle between authenticity and cosmopolitanism. I'm firmly on the side of the cosmopolitans. I think this people claiming to be representatives of the only authentic language, the only authentic culture, all these self-proclaimed guardians of Bharatiya Sanskriti, come on. Bharatiya Sanskriti is able to be sufficiently capacious to accommodate various other influences without losing its strength and its character. In fact, in many ways, we have been a culture that took in influences. Even our food has come from so many different parts of the world. Over the years, things we think of as quintessentially Indian dishes. For God's sake, we didn't have potatoes in India till 1600 or thereabouts, and who on earth would even challenge that, aloo gobi or aloo methi isn't an Indian dish? But the fact is, of course it is. We didn't have chilies until it was brought into this country from Latin America. We didn't have tomatoes. So, I mean, we as a culture, we have always absorbed. And there is no such thing as authentic. Authentic then would be the Indian culture of 1500 BC. Is that authentic? Come on. I don't agree with this at all.
All right, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
We have time for just two more questions.
So, Dr. Tharoor, in my small capacity as the director of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, I'm trying to bring about certain words that we would like children to use in their vocabulary to show animals in a different space. So we would want children to look at dogs not as street dogs but community animals or companion animals to make them more inclusive. And I've been working with PETA for a couple of years. I do school workshops, and we're trying to tell children some very simple things like treat animals just like you treat yourself. So could you address an animal as he or she instead of calling them it? Now that's where the dichotomy happens when I go to a textbook board and I tell NCERT that could you use a he or a she in your textbook, and they come back to me saying that it's wrong English. So I'm stuck over there. Having said that, I respect where NCERT, the intellectuals are coming from. My only request to the people, to the audience, and to everyone is that sometimes language can be very confusing for animals. So if we can view animals also somewhere in the scheme of humans, and just treat them with dignity and respect. And that's when we talk about a word called speciesism. Let's treat all species as the same. And I don't know, there was no question.
That's a wonderfully ethical principle, and certainly I think Gandhiji didn't famously say that you can judge a civilization by the way it treats its animals. And so I certainly take your point very validly. On street dogs, I think community animals or community dogs is not a bad idea at all because they belong to the whole community. Companion, I think, is a bit hypocritical because they're no one's companion, unfortunately. But maybe homeless dogs. I mean, that's what they are. They don't belong to a particular home as we understand the term. On other things like he or she, you're flying in the face, of course, of centuries of usage, where he or she was confined to human beings. Except, of course, in anthropomorphic texts like children's writing, where the dogs and cats and birds and so on are humanized like characters. My sister writes children's stories where constantly she's using he and she for a bird or a cat or a dog. But in normal conversation amongst adults, I think the need to specify gender is what dictates the use of the word. So if you are, for example, talking about an animal that you need for a mating purpose with another animal, then you'd have to specify the gender. You could say he or she. But whether you would say it in routine conversation, it is a challenge. You will have, I mean, I see your point and why you're doing it, but at the same time, how do you get a universal adoption? And as you said, NCRT was resistant. Let me see if I can contribute in any way, but I can't promise you because I know it won't be easy. Having said that, you talked about speciesism. I must accuse Peter of speciesism against we humans. You elected me the hottest vegetarian of the year. Do you know how much trouble you caused me? They have this annual thing, they declare the hottest vegetarian of the year, and one year it was me and Vidya Balan or something. So we did meet and confirm that each of us was cool and not hot. Okay, one last.
We have 1 minute to go, so we take Catherine and that's it. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so two fun questions.
Yeah.
Just very short. I am sure the older folk would have heard of Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, Mind Your Language, Faulty Towers, all of which were hit series of their time. We don't have something like that right now to get students to really love the language. If there was an opportunity, you've done stand-up comedy, would you be able...
I'm not going there.
I'm not finished. If Manjari and her troupe came up with this solid idea of creating a series on literature, would you consent on playing the lead role?
I think my voters may have a different view on the wisdom of that, but I'll take it under advisement, as they say in these formal settings. Second.
And the second one is, everyone out here who's read you knows that you're not a very big
By
fan.
the way, there was an Indian version of Yes Minister. Huh?
There was, yeah. There was.
There was there was it? G Mantri.
No, I was talking specifically English.
G Mantri.
No, I was specifying English. I mean, for
Okay.
that purpose. All right. And the second interesting question is, I'm very aware that you are not a very big fan of Winston Churchill or Disraeli. So here's your challenge. Can you please tell us, against everything that you've
I'm being challenged all the time.
you're really written, okay, one quote of each of them that you actually like?
Churchill and who was the other one?
Disraeli. Benjamin
Disraeli. All right. Churchill, I think the quote I actually like is a somewhat irreverent one when he was sitting next to a lady who also shared my view of him and said to him, Mr. Churchill, if you were my husband, I would poison you. And he turned around and said to her, if I were your husband, ma'am, I would drink it. So that was pretty effective. Though I must say about Churchill that my favorite Churchill story is one against him. In the days when he was a pompous old windbag, he'd lost all his ministerial positions. He hadn't made this dramatic comeback and become prime minister again. He said that he walked into the sort of common room of the House of Commons and found this very large Labour MP who had even bigger paunch than I have, sitting there, and in his usual bluff and hearty manner, patted him on the belly and said, so what are you going to name the offspring? And the Labour MP, I think his name was Morley, looked up at him and said, well, if it is a boy, I shall name him George after the king. If it is a girl, I shall name her Mary after the queen. But if, as I very much suspect, it is nothing but gas, I shall name it Winston. Disraeli, I think there's a famous story of somebody somebody asking, challenging his use of the word calamity, I think, and disaster in a speech, something like that. I think, yeah, that's right. Mr. Gladstone, his major rival, challenged him about his describing something as a calamity and not a disaster, or disaster not a calamity. And he said, but, Mr. Gladstone, there is a difference between the two. So if you fell into the river, it would be a disaster. But if someone fished you out, it would be a calamity. Something like that. Anyway, I haven't looked it up recently, but it's more or less like that.
So we've run out of time, but there is something still that we need to do. And Dr. Tharoor, you've created new words. Today PILF would like to give you a new word.
Uh-oh.
Yes, and yeah, so the word, of course, it's a portmanteau in your language in the book, from the book. So for a person like Dr. Tharoor, who's charismatic, inspiring, and who inspires others to aspire to be like you, we've created a new word. And can we type it? It's called Karanspira. So a Karanspira like Dr. Tharoor. Okay, it's CHARINSPIRER. So that's a noun, and to Karanspire means it's a verb. It's a verb to be like you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor.
Most kind. Thank you all for your
It's been amazing.
attentive listening during this long conversation. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.